Efficiency Unlocked is hosted by two tech-savvy physicians and dear friends of mine, Drs. Carewe and Dale Gold, who are experts in using technology to automate routine tasks and increase efficiency in everyday and business life. Let's see what they have for us today.
We talked to one of our clients when we were discussing this matter, and they had the exact same reaction. But they said, "I think my colleagues are hallucinating all the time." In terms of when I get back, we'll have to talk to each other and say, "Well, how did you get to that?"
That's our return guest this week, Reuben, the CEO and co-founder of Pieces. He's joking about how humans hallucinate or put errors in the medical record all the time, but we're talking about a serious topic.
We were building our classification framework of how do you determine what a hallucination is, and simultaneously we said, okay, if we think that there's a potential hallucination, then how would we intercept it before it would go back in the clinical workflow?
We're going to talk about this hallucination framework that Pieces developed to monitor its own LLM AI.
It would be good to put this out there and be transparent. And it really focuses on hallucination. And as we talked about in the paper, there's many other types of errors that, as an industry, we also need to focus on. And we're gonna be continuing to publish that information.
We hope you enjoy this week's episode as we welcome Reuben back to the NerdMD's Efficiency Unlocked show. Welcome to this week's episode. This is a recurring guest for us, which I love now that we've been around long enough that we have recurring guests coming back. But super excited to have Reuben here today to talk about kind of the latest with Pieces. So first of all, I guess welcome, Reuben. I should always let people know that you are actually listening when I do some of these intros. So welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here. I think you're the stop for all the clinical AI companies.
Yeah, no,
talk about their work.
It's been fun. It's been fun. I can't even imagine how many different, people I've met and kind of relationships have been built over this. So I always say, like, all these AI companies that, especially some that are directly competing with each other, are actually all working for the same goal, right? We're all trying to make healthcare better for the clinicians and physicians and nurses and everybody else that's doing it. So we're technically all on the same team, even though sometimes we're battling for the same contracts. Happy to have you back. But I think, so this episode, what we're going to dive into is, a paper that Pieces put out. After reading it and kind of trying to digest it as well, let me read the title of it in case, people didn't read the notes before listening, but, it's titled "A System to Classify, Detect, and Prevent Hallucinatory Error in Clinical Summarization, an Analysis of 5.4 million AI-generated inpatient clinical summaries." So again, I think I'll give a little bit of framework, kind of like what I kind of got out of it, but just the high level, kind of this would be like the Cliff Note version. And then Reuben, let's jump in, and I'd love to hear just, some of your, some of your ideas and kind of motivation for doing this. But really, I think unless, you haven't been paying attention, I think in the public or anything with any of these large language models that are out there for kind of consumer use or clinical use, is there is a challenge with hallucinations, right? And, I think from the paper, Pieces explains that, there's a classification framework that you guys have come up with that helps to kind of characterize these errors and tries to mitigate them in the best way possible, right? And, I mentioned in the title that you guys analyzed 5.4 million of these AI generated notes, because you guys have been around for a while now. And I think it was from January of 23 to August of 24. So I mean, that's a good chunk of time. And the focus on it was these like kind of severe hallucinations, which is what everyone cares about, right? I always make the analogy to like an autonomous car, right? Nobody cares about the times that the car gets you to your destination without doing anything. They really just care about when it makes that bad mistake, right? And then the person has to intervene and grab the wheel. And so that's kind of the analogy of this, is you're really looking for what's the rate of those, kind of really erroneous components. And then, you guys dive into this human in the loop platform, the adversarial detection module, which are great. These are like systems that you guys actually created, which in a way, these are, I mean, my opinion, these are like proprietary systems that you guys have tried to develop. And now you're putting it out there in the public, right? I mean, it's always that little bit of a risk, right? Like how much do you want to expose versus not? But I think, overall, the findings of this showed that overall there's this very low rate of severe hallucinations. And, we can talk about some of the details of that, but I mean, that's really the gist of it. And really it, I think this demonstrates that there is this potential to safely deploy, this type of artificial intelligence in clinical work. And as long as you have some of these checks and balances in there, again, as these tools mature and hopefully just get better naturally. But is that a fair summarization from at least my recollection of the paper?
That's an excellent summarization. No hallucinations there.
Yeah, I didn't hallucinate in this intro anyway.
No, that's awesome. Yes. I think just to put some framing on what you just said, part of our goal, we're different than some of the work out there that has been obviously in the news, which is ambient scribes, which is, listen to the conversation between the doctor and patient, then translate that into a note. Our approach, which is very focused on the inpatient side, is can we create a 100 to 150 word summary of what's happening to the patient every 2 to 15 minutes, relatively frequently. As those listeners that work in inpatient medicine know, the patient situations can change pretty rapidly over the course of hours. And so can we represent, 150 words or less, what's happening with that patient? And it's not a summary that is like a progress note or a discharge summary. Let's put those, it's just more of a orientation. It's something that can be used as a handoff. It can be used to help for multidisciplinary rounds to orient an individual. So it's really not necessarily what we call clinical decision support, but we thought that information is still very important for there to be, no kind of hallucination errors. And the definition of a hallucination is really information that doesn't exist that's being brought into this kind of generated content, right? Which is one of the risks of large language models. And so the first thing is how do we even measure that? What are the types of hallucinations that you really want to avoid? Because these are what we call draft summaries. And, a clinician wouldn't necessarily make them official until they review it and edit it or sign it, if they even want to use it for that purpose, or otherwise it's just orientation. And so we first said, can we come up with a risk, like a risk severity system from extremely severe to like minor to minimal. And so we spent several years, Adam, trying to think through that. What is the type for a summary that is not necessarily part of the legal medical record, but really just a quick snapshot of this is what's happened to the patient right now, this is what's happened recently. What would be the right kind of types of errors that we would have to make sure we avoid at all costs? And that's what we call this concept of severe hallucination. Yep. So we define that, and then we try to measure it, and then we report on it, and that's that rate of less than or about 1 in 100,000 to 10 in 100,000 is the range we got.
Yeah, and I mean, I think back on our first podcast, I mean, we briefly talked about this, right? I mean, you mentioned it, and I think I might have even made a comment. I didn't actually listen to that. I should have listened to that show before we had this conversation. But I remember thinking, at least, even if I didn't say it verbally, that like I was not aware of any other AI clinical company that was using generative AI in any way that was reporting any level of those numbers. Because, to your point, most of the companies that are using this right now are kind of sitting in that AI scribe space. There's some other ones that are doing review or other pieces of summarization, but not in the way that you're describing, where it's kind of like really, it's summarizing that journey day to day, for a patient as they're going throughout their hospital stay. And and I guess too, like around this overall classification framework that you guys have, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that it's my
Mm-hmm.
understanding that you guys developed this in line with the development of this company, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this wasn't like reactionary. I mean, you guys were kind of doing this in I would say, that fringe early adopter space. I mean, you were doing this before everything kind of really blew up. And so, yeah, can you talk a little bit about that kind of
Yes.
that
Yeah.
development and motivation of it? Because I think
Yeah,
that's
let me tell
to
you,
hear.
talk to you about some of the history of that, and it's been in the news too recently. So we'll talk about that. But we were when we started this work as can we build this summary based on everything in the record? um, we there was an element of, well, how would we know if we got it right, and and how would we know if there's a serious error? So we began thinking about, one, how would you define that serious error, and how would you be able to, if you had physicians reviewing it, would they agree on what that error is? That concept of agreement around a classification of an error or of any kind of classification is called inter-rater reliability. And that's really important, is if you have multiple reviewers looking at something, you want them to have a good classification would be one that there's a relatively high level of agreement. And you and I know both in medicine, even things like radiology and other things,
Mm-hmm.
people will have disagreements. And uh, even if you look at a patient, right? I think people would have different views on what's happening or describing the narrative differently. So I think one of the achievements over the years as we built this classification was, could we have one that would have a high inter-rater reliability and would have very clearly stark definitions. And so we try to lay out in the manuscript how we arrived at that and how we define it, and we show that it has a pretty very strong inter-rater reliability based on early tests, and we'll keep testing that. Um, and so now, so we have been developing this over several years, and then we've built a software platform that comes alongside it called SafeRead, which helps us measure these hallucinations across our client base, and gives us a sense of the rate and severity of hallucinations. So that's been something that we've developed over 5 years, really.
Yeah, and that Safe Read platform, just I guess for clarity, that's like an internal platform, right? That your
Yes.
thesis team, the clinical team, is using. And in the paper, there's actually, you guys share a screenshot of it too, which
Yeah.
again, that's probably like some IP that you're just kind of, hey, this is
Yeah.
how it works. But I do think I mean, I encourage anyone can download this paper too,
Yeah.
from your website. And I mean, I think if anyone's interested in this, definitely go and download it and review it, because there's some good graphical depictions, including, this Safe Read platform that you just referred to.
And thanks so much for mentioning that. One of the things is we don't believe that there's a lot of, to our knowledge, good frameworks out there. There needs to be more. And so part of our, thought process here was, it would be good to put this out there and be transparent. And it really focuses on hallucination. And as we talk about in the paper, there's many other types of errors that, as an industry, we also need to focus on. And we're gonna be continuing to publish that information. But if anybody's interested, you can see the mechanism in the paper of how we do it. To spend a little bit of time on SafeRead, essentially, what we named that platform because we said, is this output safe to read? And so this is the SafeRead platform, and essentially, what we have a kind of multi-part system where pieces would identify, this might be a summary with a serious or severe hallucination, and then it gets sent into the SafeRead platform where we have board certified physicians who review it and evaluate whether or not that hallucination is there. And there's a very specific framework that they walk through as they annotate it, and that helps us catch those kinds of hallucinations before they arrive to a clinician on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I guess how long, I mean, so obviously I'm sure that platform has like kind of
Yeah.
developed and kind of evolved over time with it too. I mean, what have been some of the challenges around, creating and then kind of iterating and with that platform internally? I mean,
Yeah.
again, this is like the thing that people aren't really aware of, right? Even your actual
Yeah.
customers, right? Like, this is like the people behind the scenes, which I think is always like fascinating to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a journey even building that platform. So we were building our classification framework of how do you determine what a hallucination is, and simultaneously we said, okay, if we think that there's a potential hallucination, then how would we intercept it before it would go back in the clinical workflow? And so there's two parts to it. The first is we have a separate AI system. It's an adversarial AI. We describe it in the paper, and the goal is you have the first AI that's kind of generating the output of the summary, and then you have a second AI that's using a combination of different methodologies, both predictive modeling, something called a knowledge graph, which is relationships between concepts that are verified. So it's a verifiable source of information, which large language models, some of the problem is that sometimes the information they're using is not verified. And then the use of large language models. So a combination of predictive modeling, knowledge graphs, and large language models. And essentially, what this adversarial AI is trying to do is say, is there something in this summary that appears to mimic patterns of hallucination in clinical medicine, in clinical summaries? So, for example, you introduce this patient in the summary as having an acute myocardial infarction, but then the treatments that are discussed are around skin disease, right? Or there's clearly a very significant event that happened in this patient's hospitalization, but then there's no corresponding treatment that would be relevant to that person's condition. And so one of the things we found is the review process and the framework we created reinforced the errors that we were finding, meaning we were uncovering errors over time. And then they get added to the knowledge graph. And then this adversarial AI gets better and better. So now we have thousands of different types of errors it's looking for. And so one of the really cool and interesting and maybe, I would say proprietary aspects of the work, and we have a number of patents around the whole system, but we're specifically getting a patent around this, which is that every chart review that's done by one of our physicians looking at these summaries is new information that results in new error types that goes into this knowledge graph that this AI is now reviewing. So it's looking for errors around different specialties, what we notice in surgical kind of areas, non-surgical areas, specific types of inconsistencies and medical inconsistencies that can be related to the large language model performance. And so now it's very hard to get through this adversarial AI without it finding these elements. And so that's been really exciting. And one of the things we report in the paper is that the adversarial system is able to find hallucinations, and particularly hallucinations that may be meaningful clinically, at 7.5 times the rate than if you just randomly sampled. And that's what you want to see. To scale any human in a loop system, you need that particular capability.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, it's fascinating too that that adversarial system that you guys have developed, it's continuing to get better and better, right? I mean, like you were saying, because every time there is this like human intervention that gets fed in to now kind of prevent that case from happening before or the next time, which is great. I mean, that's the way these models, like in these types of checks and balances, can continue to get better. That's super. It's really interesting. I mean, I think so. I guess like since you guys have started having this, have you guys been able to detect any noticeable change in like any of these general hallucinations getting kind of better with time, like, reducing them just because the models are getting better and obviously these systems you have too? I mean, is there anything
Yeah,
you've
I
been
think
able
so.
to?
So here's what we noticed, and we encourage individuals to look at the kind of how we grade severity. So the most serious type of hallucination in clinical summarization, in our view, would be where a hallucination, the summary has information that, if you took it as fact, would suggest you need to take action in 60 minutes or less, and it may be, a serious, potentially irreversible action, right? So that is what we identified, and what all of our clients and everyone else has all agreed, that is a type of hallucination that you obviously want to avoid. And that rate, Adam, is where we've been extremely excited that it's been, one is on a large body of summaries, we've essentially observed zero of those kinds of hallucinations. But just because you observe zero doesn't mean the true rate across millions and millions of summaries are zero. So that's what we spend a lot of time statistically showing in our paper, that we can get to a rate that we approximate from 1 to 10 in 100,000. So we feel like we've done a good job of showing that rate is exceedingly low, if not, just not seen. What we're seeing the adversarial system do over time is now starting to improve beyond just severe hallucination, less severe hallucinations. So the less severe hallucinations, as we define the paper, would be things that are not quite in the records, but could be inferred, but there wasn't clear evidence of that, or stylistic or grammar kinds of things, things like past tense versus present tense on a specific piece of information. Frequently, when you have individuals with very long histories, let's say they have, 5 to 10 years of history with this health system, plus they're now got a complex hospital course, it can be very confusing to, even for human clinicians, to distinguish, when did that surgery occur? Was that, present now, if you're just coming into the case? So being able to have a longitudinal, clear history, I think, is really important for these kind of summarization capabilities. So we're finding the adversarial system is now able to get to these lower level, less time sensitive, more minor kind of hallucinations and eliminate those more and more, so that you're getting extremely accurate. We're finding from some of the clients, they're like, one of the things they like is they're able to, sometimes if you're going back through a patient's history, the exact dates of things can be really hard. And so the adversarial systems are helping us, get really good chronological order correct, the tense correct, the style of the way the summary should be written for a particular specialty correct. So it's really becoming a partner to the original AI in creating the summary. So that's where we're really excited about where this is going.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning too in this, for those that are listening, is like, there's not, I mean, this stuff's like still relatively new, and we don't have good benchmarks out there, right? I mean, obviously there's organizations like Chai that are starting to evolve and like trying to at least create frameworks for, evaluating kind of different AI systems, but like none of this actually exists. And I think, earlier you alluded to, pieces being in the news recently with,
Yeah.
with the Texas AG, and, you know, can you comment on that a bit, and like kind of just because I think people are going to understand, like, okay, was this paper a result of that or a reflex of that? Or I think we're clear the stuff you've built have been all intentional from the beginning, but love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on that. And before I talk about that, I would say we're 100% supportive of all of these organizations that are trying to figure out how we talk about and describe this. And so one of our intents with this paper is to bring it forward to some of these consortiums and organizations who we're part of, and who we're working with. Chai is one example. There's others. And one of our hopes is that our framework actually gets adopted by the industry. We haven't seen another hallucination framework, so we would welcome our framework maybe being combined with others or being used for wider use. So we're going to encourage that. Um, but on the Texas AG matter, so thank you. We're a company based in Texas, and we had, as we had mentioned, we had wanted to measure and report on this, and we set out to develop one. And we had made the comment that we think our rate of severe hallucination in our summaries is 1 in 100,000. We had kind of made that comment publicly, I think, on your podcast as well as
mentioned it on
in
there.
press releases, and we backed it up and talked about it. That the Texas Attorney General has a group within that office that's looking at the AI and AI companies in important industries like healthcare, and they criticized us or reached out to us and said, we think presenting a rate of what you think your hallucination rate is on a framework that you've made and is not an independent third-party framework may be misleading. We strongly disagreed with them, although we do commend them for actually trying to, understand how we should be talking about this in this industry and in Texas and healthcare, and we have a number of Texas health systems that are our clients. So we think that it's important for the regulatory bodies to be paying attention to this. So we definitely commend on that, but we disagreed on, in the absence of any framework and classification framework, we think we're completely correct to, put out a framework and at least say, based on that framework, this is kind of what our rate is, but we're open to better frameworks, other ways to do it. And precisely to our point earlier, there haven't been any frameworks. And so we thought at least we'll report it. And so we felt, and some of our customers even said this, that there may have been a little bit of a performance penalty with this, that we went out there and put our rates out there, and then we were comment on it. But we ended up, working with the Texas Attorney General, and I'm very hopeful. I'm excited about, we worked on an agreement with them where we would, continue to talk as openly as possible about all these metrics and report on all of them. And so we've done that, and now we're moving to, our next step was, okay, we have this publication that we're working on. Let's get this out there, and let's really, in great detail, talk about what we've done over the last 5 years, how we came up with this framework, can open it up to others to use, and then we wanted to vigorously defend this rate of 1 in 100,000. Now, I think the last thing I'll say about it is I think hallucinations is one type of error type. We think we've extensively covered it in the manuscript. There's other things like omissions, which is, is information missing in the summary? That's opposite of hallucination. That would have been important to present. It's less of a, it's not talked about as much. It's not as well known, but we're applying the same approach, which is a similar type of framework. And I think there's other things around the quality, the comprehensiveness. One of the things that we talked about in our paper is the PDQI-9. We're getting pretty technical here, but listeners of your podcast are technical. So physician documentation quality improvement score is a peer-reviewed method that looks at the comprehensiveness, quality, and of documentation for progress notes. And so we actually are working with one of our academic health systems that's doing a IRB approved study where they're doing it on their own, where they're applying the PDQI-9 to our summaries, and they're taking physicians and writing their own summaries, comparing it to PISA summaries, and then doing this framework. And I don't want to steal their thunder. I think the results are looking really good. But I think that's a different measure than hallucination. That's like, you could have no hallucinations and no omissions, but your summary may not be well written. We see that. It could be technically true, but not well written. It might not be mentioning, you might prioritize the wrong things. It could be completely true. Like, you could talk about a heart attack patient that has cellulitis and mention cellulitis in your summary, but you're not prioritizing enough the myocardial infarction. So there's a lot of different ways and frameworks that need to be developed and measured. But we're proud of this. We want to put this out there, and we think any kind of press on this is kind of, in a sense, good press, because our view now is we think every AI company should have as their ambition reporting their rates,
Yeah.
and find a framework. It could be your own, it could be ours, it could be Chai's, whatever it is. And then I think you need to report on it. And if you can't, then, I think if you're not measuring what you're putting out, then how are you going to manage it? Right. So I think that's the big question we would raise.
Yeah, no, that I love like what you brought up about that, the documentation kind of quality, framework. It's just funny. I mean, because obviously those things exist, but like in general, like there's been bad doctor notes, bad nursing notes for years,
Yes.
right? Like, I mean, we hallucinate all the time. Like,
okay.
I mean,
right.
Gosh, I mean, the times I've reviewed a chart where like someone even just used like dictation for part of it, and you're like,
Yeah.
wait, you just said like this person climbed the hill and did something else, and you're like, they had nothing to do with like climbing the hill, like that. So it's interesting because again, I mean, like I made that reference to like self-driving cars. It's like the bar of like acceptance is
Yep.
like so much different than our human errors that we make all the time around life.
Yep.
But it's true. I mean, because I think what everyone is hoping we get to with artificial intelligence is eventually it really does start like supplanting some of the need for clinicians. I mean, people always freak out when you say, oh, a physician or a nurse is going to be replaced by some AI, but like I still really do believe that like what we're going to be in the future as doctors and nurses and caretakers, it's going to look a whole lot different, and I mean, again, these tools and AI in general, I mean, has the ability to make us infinitely more safe than we are right now. Like, and really,
I think that's so true.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, so, I have both a funny comment and that riff off of yours, as well as, a more serious one, which is that we talked to one of our clients when we were discussing this matter, and they had the exact same reaction where they said, I think my colleagues are hallucinating all the time. Like in terms of when I get back, we'll have to talk to each other and say, wait, how did you get to that? And that happens a lot. But more seriously, there's been studies, I think, published in really important journals like JAMA and others, where if you look at medical charts across the United States, that you could see rates of anywhere between 25 to 50% of those charts having errors in them, errors of documentation, and 10% of those being severe, like severe as in the form that we are describing our severe hallucination definition. And so, if you compare what at least, let's say, PIECES or other systems, if it's getting a rate of 1 in 100,000, 0.0001%, compared to 10%, I mean, it's a major improvement. But this is what's interesting is and it's probably appropriate, but the bar for AI and machines is always going to be way higher. And so we think that that's acceptable. But I think there's going to be a point in time, you're probably in the same boat, where if you have a loved one, you'd be like, is that hospital using safe AI? Because I don't want them going to another hospital. It's like flying a plane without a co-pilot. So.
No, totally agree. Well, I mean, I think, a good thing to kind of wrap with is just, we kind of just alluded to the meta future of this, but like, where do you kind of see, pieces kind of like evolving or kind of, getting to? Cause we talked a little bit about that, I think, on the last show. I always ask people what kind of where the puck's going for them, but like since that time, where do you think, in light of all of this and everything else that's evolving in this space, where do you see pieces going next?
Well, there's a couple of big areas. One thing that this opened up for us, just the work, the publications, the stuff that we've been discussing publicly, is we do have the ambition, Adam, for on the inpatient side for our work to be the safest, among the safest, if not the safest in the industry. And so we're doubling down on safe read for all of the types of documentation. We've actually been asked, could that platform be used by health systems specifically? Could they use it in their own chart review kind of? And that's been really intriguing to start talking to client systems about, even if they're not using the PIECES AI, could they use our safe read system on their AI systems that they might be implementing or using. Applying safe read to every form of AI documentation in every area, we think is really interesting, and scaling it to do that, including, and this is one of the most exciting things, we are going to be announcing an NIH award that we've won to use safe read on patient chat conversations. So you have an AI that's interacting with the patient, explaining what's happening in the record, and being able to provide this adversarial oversight with human in the loop in real time at scale. That's the question, right? And so we've already been able to do it for these summaries that are doing every 250 minutes. But imagine if you could have proper supervision of these AI conversations. I think this would really take away a lot of the stress of could those conversations go off the rails, but also help providers, right? Because you always wonder are the right things being said and everything like that. So we're really looking to scale safe read to every kind of AI interaction. We're starting to think about how we even work with other AI companies for their products. Could we do that? There's a lot of possibilities there. And then, we built this chassis of the working summary, that 150 word summary that we talked about, that now is, we've been really getting really exciting, rollouts and working with our clients on now expanding that summary to all these other kind of documentation products. So discharge summaries has become a hit. Like no one likes writing a discharge summary. So we're getting massive, kind of almost viral adoption of clients where there's almost no training required, and they're automatically using it.
Nice.
So discharge summaries, progress notes, something we're calling a lifetime ambulatory summary. So coming into, I know you're a big fan. Ambulatory work is, can we take a person that's been in the system for 7 years and be able to create a nice one-page summary for primary care physician, for the specialist, especially they're getting, especially if you have someone with PDFs and all these records, plus coming from an outside system. So trying to summarize that. So we are really focused on our area of how do we present the information in the most concise way to be able to be used in any circumstance. How do you provide safety, maximal safety, and then how could you start applying that safety to other forms of communication, like AI conversation, right? So anyway, so we've been excited by it.
Very cool. Yeah, that AI conversation part, it definitely excites me, because I think, that's something that just is so needed in healthcare, right? I mean, like we have humans having conversations, with patients all the time, like on a kind of, call it a pre-visit or kind of triage basis, and being able to deploy some of these tools that can really help us take care of more people, at a larger scale is critically important.
I know you've talked about it a lot, right? Like that headless EHR concept at some point.
Yeah. And like, just, people, I mean, I don't know. I always harp that, like, we have a problem in healthcare, right? There's a diminishing pool of the clinicians, physicians, and frankly, nurses and everyone else. And we have a growing pool of patients in the US. Like, that's a collision course for badness, right? I mean, unless we can put something in the middle that allows truly people to take care of more people with less resource.
That's really true.
And I think, what you were just describing, I mean, going that route and helping in those ways, in all these ways, is really going to help. I mean, I think too, even that summarization piece you talked about, like, I think of like an ER doc. Like, I mean, I've worked in a pretty robust urgent care before, so it's sort of like an ER, but like, I mean, in ER, those people are coming into you like blind, like you don't know them at all, right?
I know, it's stressful. I mean,
and it's like, you're obviously trying to take care of what acute issue they have, but like, you really do need the context of like their entire history. And if there's someone who touches the ambulatory setting like once a week in a variety of visits and encounters and things, like, there's no way that a human could ever like synthesize that. I mean, that's going to need to be, some sort of summarized technology that is going to let you know and at least nudge you or something. So
for sure, especially if there's a lot of like, the person themselves can't communicate it, right? Sometimes, or the family members don't know, it's very complicated. That would be that'd be really useful for sure.
Totally. I mean, I remember back, this is like me going back to med school days, but I remember distinctly this patient I was on my internal medicine rotation, and, there was a family that they carried around this like jump drive, this little USB drive back then.
Oh, wow.
And it was the daughter of I think it was her dad that was in the hospital, but it was amazing. She had basically created like little summaries, of her dad's journey. Like she had like the high yield one, and then she had kind of all these specialist ones. And I just remember back then you could just plug a jump drive into a computer, which is crazy too. But that definitely wouldn't be allowed now. But I went over and I printed all these things off, and it was like, I knew more about this patient than I knew about anybody ever.
All the other patients. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that was like a almost like a mini patient health record, right? Like a PHR.
Exactly. Yeah. Like just your little, and she just said she did it for herself because she couldn't keep track of all of her dad's stuff. And but for a hospital admission, it was amazing. We knew what to do. So, that's what you're describing.
What's your take on that? Cause I've seen you comment on it publicly. One of the things is people are taken care of by different systems. Are you excited about, how do you feel about the developments around the sharing of information? And because if that could really happen, you could see AI systems being able to then summarize even better when you're taking care of multiple systems. That's one of the big challenges, I think.
Agree. I think there's just been so many point solutions that have blossomed, that are fulfilling a real need for consumers, but that information is just hidden away. Yeah. So I do. I'm pretty optimistic about, the evolution of HIE and actually getting to a point. Ideally where, frankly, it's probably going to have to be mandated, but once we get to that point where everybody has to at least pipe the information in, from their system. Mm-hmm. And then, to your point, I think there can be, these more sophisticated AI systems that will be able to summarize it. And frankly, there'll probably be companies that come out of this that just do that for a patient even, there'll be obviously clinical ones, but I even think there's going to be this whole gold rush of patient facing ones.
100%. Yeah.
So, I don't know how soon it's going to happen, but I definitely keep my pulse on that because I think it's an exciting space, and it'll, like I said earlier, it'll go back to that part where patients will kind of be able to have some more ownership of their info and more confidence that they understand what's going on too. If there's these systems. It's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's going to really empower people.
Yeah. Well, Reuben, thank you today. Do you have time for a couple nerd alert questions?
Let's do it.
You can prepare these ahead of time for myself.
I remember I couldn't answer one of yours last time.
That's all right. No. So, okay, I'll give you. I pulled up I have a super long list that I normally curate from ahead of time. But what's your favorite way to relax after a long day?
The best way is probably there's two things. I love to read, so I'm a big reader, and then the other thing is just hanging out with the family. That's the ultimate. So just appreciating that more and more as I get older. And the kids, my kids are about to leave the nest, so I really appreciate every day with them.
Yeah, I had a ton of colleagues at Kaiser that I worked with, in informatics who were a little older than me, and so they had kids that were all leaving, and hearing their stories of when they left and their kids went away to college or left for good, so to speak. It makes me cherish the times I have with my kids now too, even more. So that's great. Along the lines of reading and book, do you have something you've read or more recently that you think is worthwhile to mention to the listeners of something to consider reading themselves?
I reread an amazing book that I hadn't read in a while. That's clinical. When Breath Becomes Air. By Paul Kalyanathan, and it's an amazing. I don't know if you recall that story, but it's a physician who is a neurosurgeon that really worked incredibly over many years, was a beautiful writer and surgeon. And at the very end of his life, at the very end of his training in his like 7th or 8th year of neurosurgery training, who was diagnosed with like stage 4 metastatic lung cancer and passed away shortly afterwards. And it was such a meditation on like the practice of medicine, like the gift that it is, as well as life and everything. And so I read it recently, and I was just really, every time I read it, incredibly moved by it. And he talks about the practice of medicine in a way where it kind of comes back to fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
What a privilege it is, which is hard to sometimes remember with all the burnout and everything. And
yeah,
you hope like the tools that we're building out of can get us there, but to what he talks about. But anyway, that's a beautiful book.
No, that's a good one. I know I read that a long time ago, and when you said the title, it like brought back the memories.
Yeah, amazing book. So that's been on my bookstand recently.
Well, cool. So I guess the last one I'll end with is like, I don't think I asked you this the last time. That's the other problem. I should have really listened to that old one. Do you still have like some sort of skill or thing that you want to try to master at this stage in your life going forward?
That's left.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So I'd have to say if I hadn't gone down the medicine path, I would have, in terms of a creative pursuit, I love art and painting and everything like that. And I would consider myself a good amateur artist. I paint all my life, but I'd love to go all in with like these emerging technologies, with AI. I think it's just an incredible period. So what I think is going to be on the horizon, which I would love to do, is can you have a one-man movie house? Like I was watching Planet of the Apes recently with my daughter. I love that movie, and I was like, can we now like do all of Planet? Are we getting to a point where you can do a Planet of the Apes as a single person, like single individual, without any of using AI in your own brain? Could you do an entire Planet of the Apes? I think we're getting there. It's wild. And so then you could start. So I would totally, if I was moving on from this, that's what I would do. I would completely go into that. I think we're getting there.
I love that.
And now there's going to be so much content. And so then I think the question is, who's really good at like sort of this? I think the original skilled storytelling skills will be what masters it, because there's going to be so much content out there, a lot of bad content. So anyway,
no, that's cool. And that's funny.
I would love to master that.
No, and that's funny because like I think I get a lot of questions. People go, "Oh, who helps you with your guys' podcast? Who edits it? Who produces it? Do you send it off? Yeah, someone doing it?" And I was like, "Oh no," I was like, "I just do it all." Dale and I kind of curate things, and then we figure out how we're going to interview, and then the podcast. Actually, the episode I just dropped today, as we're recording this, is actually using the Notebook LM tool, which you can grab sources of information and you can create a podcast with Gen AI. So definitely, if folks haven't listened to that one, you should go back and listen to it, because it's a pretty amazing crazy tool. Yeah. So back to, to your content, is there going to be a bunch of this blast of content at some point? There might be. Yeah. But, well, cool. Well, thanks again, Reuben, for coming back on. Obviously, I encourage people to read this, paper you guys put out. You can just go to the Pieces website and download that there. Wish you the best, Reuben, and keep up the good work while you're fixing healthcare. We appreciate it.
You too, Adam, and congratulations on your recent moves. It's super exciting, and you're a huge light for the industry. Thank you for all the information you provide, and your optimism and enthusiasm. Amazing.
Cool.
Appreciate you.
All right, Reuben. Have a good one.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Efficiency Unlocked, Nerd Tested, MD Approved, a Nerd MD's podcast by Drs. Adam Carewe and Dale Gold.